The surrender ceremony took place on Peaceful Station, a neutral meeting point between the two fleets. Kim Tai-ho had never felt so nervous in his entire life. He was about to meet the most feared military commander in the galaxy who wanted to surrender. To him personally, Admiral Thokvar of the Corvan Empire arrived with full military honors. His ship was massive and covered in weapon systems that could destroy planets. His escort included 12 heavy cruisers and 40 fighter craft. It was the largest show of force anyone had ever seen for a surrender. Tai-ho wore his simple diplomatic uniform and carried his worn notebook. He felt like a child about to meet a dragon. The difference between him and the legendary Corvan admiral was so vast that it seemed impossible they were the same species. The meeting room was huge and formal, with flags from every galactic species hanging from the ceiling. Representatives from dozens of worlds had come to witness this historic moment. The most aggressive empire in known space was about to surrender to a human logistics coordinator. Admiral Thokvar entered the room like a walking mountain. He was 3 meters tall, covered in battle scars, and wearing medals from 100 conquered worlds. His 4 arms were each as thick as Tai-ho's entire body. His skin was dark red like dried blood, and his eyes glowed with inner fire. But when he saw Tai-ho, the massive alien did something nobody expected. He bowed deeply and respectfully, as if greeting a revered teacher. The most feared being in the galaxy was showing honor to a confused young man from Seoul. Your tactical brilliance has shown us the futility of continued aggression, Admiral Thokvar declared through the universal translator. His voice was deep and rumbling like distant thunder. We have studied human military history since this battle began. Your species has fought more wars than any other known civilization. Tai-ho tried to interrupt, but the admiral continued speaking. You understand. Conflict at a level we cannot match, he said. The way you manipulated our fleet movements without direct engagement was masterful. You turned our own tactical thinking against us, using methods we had never encountered. Admiral Thokvar gestured to his aide, who brought forward a data pad filled with analysis. The Corvan military had spent days studying every aspect of human warfare, from ancient battles to modern conflicts. They had convinced themselves that Earth was a planet of warrior philosophers. Have learned that humans develop strategic thinking through constant conflict, the admiral explained. Your species has never known true peace. This has created evolutionary pressure that produced superior military minds. We cannot compete with such natural advantages. Tai-ho finally found his voice. Admiral, I think there has been a misunderstanding. I am not a military strategist. I am just a logistics coordinator. I worked for a shipping company before joining the diplomatic mission. The alien admiral looked confused, but then smiled in a way that was probably meant to be reassuring. Of course you would say that, he replied. Humility is a sign of true wisdom. The greatest warriors often claim to be simple soldiers. The Corvan surrender came with an unexpected proposal. They wanted to hire human tactical advisors for their military academies. They believed that Earth strategic knowledge could help them become better peacekeepers instead of conquerors. We have been aggressors for too long, Admiral Thokvar admitted. Our methods have brought us victory but not honor. We wish to learn from human wisdom to become protectors instead of destroyers. The other galactic species watched in amazement as the conversation continued. The Corvans were offering to transform their entire military philosophy based on their respect for human tactical abilities. They wanted to study Earth history and learn what they thought were advanced, peaceful strategies. Tai-ho tried again to explain that he was not qualified to teach military strategy, but nobody would listen. The myth of human superiority had become more powerful than reality. The Corvans were determined to believe that Earth possessed ancient wisdom about warfare and peace. The formal surrender documents were signed with great ceremony. The Corvan Empire agreed to cease all aggressive actions and withdraw from occupied territories. They would release prisoners and pay reparations to the worlds they had conquered. More importantly, they requested that human advisors be assigned to help them restructure their military forces. The galaxy's most feared empire wanted to learn from what they believed was the galaxy's most advanced warrior culture. Admiral Yuki approached Tai-ho after the ceremony, her scales bright with happiness. "You have achieved something unprecedented," she told him. "You ended a war without violence. You turned enemies into students seeking wisdom." Back aboard the flagship, Taeho sat in his small quarters staring at his simple notebook. He had written down everything that happened, but he still could not understand how his basic observations had led to this moment. The communication system chimed with an incoming message from Earth. The news of the Corvin surrender had reached home and the entire planet was celebrating. Taeho had become the most famous human in history. Overnight, government officials wanted to promote him. Military academies wanted to study his methods. Historians wanted to interview him about his revolutionary tactics. The quiet observer had become a legend whether he wanted to or not. Lee So-young found him sitting alone in the observation lounge looking out at the stars. She was the only other Korean on the mission, and she understood how overwhelming this must be for him. "You know what really happened, do you not?" she asked. Sitting beside him on the metal bench, Taeho nodded slowly. "I pointed out some obvious things that others missed because they were thinking too complicated. Then the enemy got scared and defeated themselves." She smiled. "It is the most human thing possible to accidentally end a war by being practical while everyone else was being clever." The Corvin Empire kept their word. Over the following months. They established peaceful relations with former enemies and requested human advisors as promised. The transformation was gradual but genuine, as they learned to use their military strength to protect rather than conquer. Earth was officially recognized as a strategic partner in the galactic community. The planet that had been ignored as primitive and warlike was now respected as a source of tactical wisdom and peaceful philosophy. The irony wrote itself in the history books. The most peaceful solution to an interstellar war had been achieved by a species that others considered naturally violent. The human reputation for warfare had become the foundation for unprecedented peace. Taeho returned to Earth as a hero, but he never forgot the lesson he had learned. Sometimes the most powerful weapon is not superior technology or advanced tactics, but the simple ability to see problems clearly and think about solutions practically. He kept his worn notebook as a reminder that extraordinary results sometimes come from ordinary observations. The greatest strategies are often the simplest ones, and the most important battles are won by people who never intended to fight in the end. The quiet observer who just wanted to watch and learn had taught the galaxy that real strength comes from understanding rather than force. His accidental victory had proven that sometimes the best way to win a war is to help your enemies defeat themselves. The legend of Kim Tae-ho would inspire generations of diplomats and peacekeepers across the galaxy. But he knew the truth. He was just a confused logistics coordinator who had stumbled into history by paying attention to details that others missed. The third day of battle brought something nobody expected. The Corvin fleet had stopped fighting entirely. Their ships hung in space like confused metal beasts, unsure of what to do next. The most feared military force in the galaxy was paralyzed. By their own imagination, Kim Tae-ho sat in the command center watching displays that showed enemy positions. The Corvin ships kept moving in strange patterns. They would start to attack, then suddenly change direction as if avoiding invisible threats. Their formation looked like a dance choreographed by someone having a nightmare. Park Min-jun was a young communication officer aboard the flagship. He had been monitoring Corvin transmissions all night, and his face was pale with exhaustion, but his eyes were bright with excitement as he brought new intelligence to Admiral Yuki. "The enemy communications are incredible," he reported. "They are talking about human tactical superiority as if it were a scientific fact. They believe that centuries of warfare on Earth have created a superior military species." Admiral Yuki listened to the translated conversations through her headphones. The Corvin officers were discussing human battle tactics with the same respect they usually reserved for their own war gods. They spoke about Taeho as if he were a legendary figure from ancient stories. One Corvin captain was heard saying that humans must have evolved special brains for warfare. Another claimed that Earth military academies taught secret strategies unknown to other species. A third officer insisted that Kim Tae-ho could see 20 moves ahead. Like a master chess player, Tae-ho felt like he was living in someone else's dream. All he had done was point out a few obvious things. that others had missed because they were thinking too hard. But somehow these simple observations had created a mythology that was spreading through space like wildfire. The psychological effect on Corvan forces was devastating. Their captains were abandoning sound tactics to avoid theoretical human strategies that existed only in their fears. Every military decision was filtered through the question of what the human tactical genius might expect them to do when Corvan Squadron 7 moved. To attack the Alliance left flank, their commander suddenly ordered a retreat. He had convinced himself that this was exactly what Tejo wanted them to do. The attack must be a trap, designed to lure them into a human counter-strategy. When Corvan heavy cruisers positioned themselves for a bombardment of Alliance supply ships, they held their fire for 3 hours. Their admiral could not decide if shooting was what the human wanted, or if not shooting was part of some elaborate psychological warfare. The Alliance commanders began to exploit this enemy confusion without fully understanding it. Every time Corvan ships retreated from strong positions, Alliance forces moved forward. When enemy formations broke apart to avoid imaginary human traps, the Galactic Fleet surrounded isolated ships. Captain Binwu reported that her light cruiser squadron had captured 3 Corvan destroyers without firing a shot. The enemy crews had surrendered because they believed they were surrounded by invisible human strike craft. Their sensors showed nothing, but their fear showed them everything. The Archon Windriders found that Corvan fighter squadrons were flying defensive patterns against phantom enemies. Entire wings of enemy fighters would break off attacks to chase sensor ghosts that their paranoid pilots mistook for human stealth ships. The Vex crystalline ships discovered that Corvan battle computers were calculating responses to tactical scenarios that had never been programmed. The enemy artificial intelligence systems were trying to counter human strategies by extrapolating from incomplete data about Earth military history. Tejo tried to explain to anyone who would listen that he was not controlling the battle. He was not sending secret signals or coordinating hidden strategies. He was just sitting in the command center, taking notes and feeling confused about everything that was happening, but nobody believed him. The Alliance crews were convinced their human observer was a military genius who operated on levels beyond normal understanding. Even Admiral Yuki seemed to think that Tejo was somehow orchestrating the enemy's psychological collapse through methods too subtle for others to detect. The truth was much simpler and much stranger. The Corvans had defeated themselves by respecting human military potential too much. Their research into Earth history had revealed a species that fought constant wars for thousands of years. They saw this as evidence of superior evolutionary pressure. What they did not understand was that humans fought so many wars because they were not very good at it. If humans were truly superior warriors, they would have achieved peace through strength long ago. Instead, Earth history showed a species that kept making the same mistakes over and over. But to alien minds that had evolved in different environments, human warfare looked like advanced tactical thinking. The messy, chaotic nature of Earth conflicts seemed like complex strategic planning. The fact that humans kept fighting suggested they must be very good at it. As the 4th day began, Corvan ships started requesting permission to withdraw from combat zones. Their admirals claimed they needed time to develop new tactics to counter human strategic advantages. The most aggressive military force in known space was asking for a timeout. The Galactic Alliance found itself in control of the battlefield without winning a decisive battle. The enemy was retreating not because they had been defeated, but because they were afraid of being defeated by someone who was not even fighting. Admiral Yuki called a meeting of all Alliance commanders. The situation was unprecedented in galactic warfare. They had achieved strategic victory through accidental psychological manipulation. None of their war colleges had taught courses on how to handle enemy surrender caused by reputation alone. The Corvan fleet is requesting formal negotiations, Admiral, Yuki announced. Her scales flickered between blue and green, showing her confusion. They want to discuss terms with our human tactical advisor specifically. Tejo felt his stomach sink. They wanted to negotiate with him. He had never negotiated anything more complex than shipping schedules back on Earth. How was he supposed to handle surrender terms for an interstellar war? But the legend of Kim Tejo had grown beyond his control. Corvan intelligence services had compiled detailed reports about his supposed abilities. They credited him with innovations in fleet deployment, psychological warfare, and multi-species coordination. The enemy believed he was a strategic mastermind who had orchestrated their defeat through pure intellectual superiority. They wanted to meet this legendary figure and learn from him. They spoke about him with the same reverence that ancient warriors showed to war gods. As preparation began for formal surrender negotiations, Taiho sat with his notebook trying to understand how his life had changed so completely. 3 days ago he was a quiet observer nobody noticed. Now he was supposedly the greatest military mind in galactic history. The irony was perfect. The most peaceful human in the diplomatic mission had accidentally become the most feared warrior in known space. His simple observations and common sense had created a legend that would reshape interstellar politics, and somewhere in the depths of space, the Corvan fleet waited to surrender to a man whose greatest tactical achievement was noticing that enemy ships were not parked in the right places. The battle for Helios Prime began with explosions that lit up space like deadly fireworks. Kim Tae-ho watched from the observation deck of the Zentari flagship as hundreds of ships moved into combat positions. The enemy fleet looked even more dangerous, up close than it had on the screens. Despite all his advice and observations, the Corvan ships proved to be tougher opponents than anyone expected. Their weapons were more powerful than intelligence reports suggested. Their armor was thicker. Their tactics were more brutal than the galactic fleet had prepared for. The first hour of fighting was a disaster for the Alliance forces. Zentari cruisers took heavy damage from Corvan plasma cannons. Archon fighters were shot down before they could reach their targets. Vex crystalline ships cracked under the pressure of enemy fire. Tae-ho felt sick watching brave beings die in the void of space. He had suggested the strategies that led to this battle. What if he had been wrong? What if his simple observations had sent thousands of aliens to their deaths? Admiral Yuki found him sitting alone on the observation deck, staring at the battle through the reinforced windows. Her scales were dark with worry, but she spoke gently to the human observer. "This is not your fault," she said, sitting beside him on the metal bench. "War is chaos and death. We knew the risks when we decided to fight. You gave us hope and better chances. That is all anyone can ask." But something strange was happening on the battlefield that neither Tae-ho nor Admiral Yuki expected. The Corvan fleet was not pressing their advantage. Instead of moving forward to destroy the damaged Alliance ships, they were pulling back into defensive positions. Their famous aggression was turning into caution. Corvan captains who normally rushed into battle were now hesitating and second-guessing their moves. The enemy formation that had seemed so solid was starting to break apart as individual ships made their own decisions. Commander Yuki received reports from her communication officers. The Corvan fleet was talking to each other much more than usual. Enemy chatter had increased by 300% since the battle began. They were discussing something that made them nervous. Lee So-young was the Alliance communication specialist. She was a young Korean woman who had joined the diplomatic mission to learn alien languages. Her job was to monitor enemy transmissions and translate what she could understand. She approached Tae-ho and Admiral Yuki with a confused expression on her face. "The translations are strange," she said. "The Corvans keep mentioning someone called the human tactical genius. They seem to think Earth has sent a secret weapon." Tae-ho felt his stomach drop. They were talking about him. But how could they know who he was? He was just an observer sitting on a ship watching the battle. So-young continued translating the intercepted messages. "The enemy believes that someone called Kim Tae-ho is directing the entire battle. They think he can predict their every move. They are scared of his strategic abilities." Admiral Yuki looked at Tae-ho with amazement. The Corvans had somehow learned his name and built him up into a legendary figure in their minds. They thought he was some kind of military mastermind who could see the future. "But I am not doing anything," Tae-ho protested. "I am just sitting here watching. I have not given any orders since the battle started." "That does not matter." Admiral Yuki realized. "The enemy thinks you are controlling everything. They are so afraid of your supposed abilities that they are making mistakes, trying to counter strategies that do not exist." The tide of battle began to shift as Corvan commanders became paralyzed by their own fears. Every time they planned an attack, they worried that the human tactical genius had already predicted it. They started making defensive moves against threats that were only in their imagination. Corvan ships that should have been attacking were instead repositioning to defend against flanking maneuvers that never came. Enemy squadrons broke off from successful attacks because their captains feared they were falling into human traps. The Alliance forces began to take advantage of the enemy confusion. Without knowing why their opponents were acting so strangely, the Galactic Fleet moved into better positions. Zentari cruisers that had been retreating suddenly found themselves facing scattered Corvan ships instead of coordinated formations. Archon fighters discovered that enemy point defense systems were firing at empty space, trying to hit phantom human strike craft that existed only in Corvan imaginations. Vex computational ships found that Corvan battle algorithms were calculating responses to fictional human tactics. Tejo watched in amazement as his reputation became a weapon more powerful than any missile or energy beam. The enemy was defeating themselves trying to fight a strategic genius who was really just a confused logistics coordinator from Solmore. Intercepted communications revealed the depth of Corvan fear. The enemy had studied human military history after learning about Tejo participation in the council meetings. They had discovered that Earth had fought more wars than most species in the galaxy. To the Corvans, this meant that humans were naturally gifted at warfare. They believed that centuries of constant conflict had evolved superior tactical abilities in the human species. They thought Tejo represented the peak of this evolutionary advantage. The irony was overwhelming. The most aggressive and warlike species in known space was now terrified of a peaceful human who had never fired a shot in anger. The Corvans, who had conquered dozens of worlds, were being psychologically defeated by someone whose only weapon was a notebook and pennies. The second day of battle began. Corvan fleet movements became even more erratic. Their admirals were spending more time trying to figure out what the human genius would do next than actually fighting the battle in front of them. Enemy ships started abandoning strong positions because their captains feared these were exactly the positions that Tejo would expect them to hold. Corvan reinforcements were delayed because commanders could not decide if moving them would fall into some elaborate human trap. The Alliance fleet found itself winning battles without understanding why. Their enemies were retreating from advantageous positions, making tactical errors and failing to coordinate their attacks properly. Admiral Yuki realized they were witnessing something unprecedented in galactic warfare. The Corvans had built such a fearsome reputation that nobody had ever considered they might be vulnerable to psychological manipulation. But somehow this quiet human observer had accidentally discovered their greatest weakness. The enemy respect for tactical brilliance had become a liability when they believed they were facing a strategic mastermind. Tejo had become a ghost that haunted Corvan decision-making. He did not need to do anything except exist. The mere knowledge that he was involved in the battle was enough to make experienced enemy commanders doubt their own judgment. By the end of the second day, Corvan ships were retreating from multiple sectors. Their fleet, which had seemed unstoppable just days before, was now scattered and demoralized. The human factor had proven more effective than any weapon system. The legend of Kim Tejo. The tactical genius was spreading through both fleets. Alliance crews whispered about their secret weapon, while Corvan soldiers told stories about the human who could predict the future. And at the center of it all sat a confused young man from Earth who still could not understand how his simple observations had started a war and were now ending it. News traveled fast through the Galactic Fleet. Kim Tejo had found a weakness that nobody else could see. Within hours, every species was talking about the human observer who spotted what their computers missed. Tejo woke up in his small quarters aboard the Zentari flagship to find messages waiting for him. Captains and commanders from different species wanted to meet with him. They wanted to know what else he might have noticed about the enemy. He felt overwhelmed. This was not what he had signed up for when Earth chose him as their diplomatic observer. He was supposed to watch and learn, not give military advice to alien fleets. Captain Bin Wu from the Zentari light cruiser squadron requested a private meeting. She was smaller than Admiral Yuki, but her scales were bright blue, which meant she was very intelligent among her people. Her tentacles moved constantly as she talked, showing how stressed she was. "The situation has changed," she told him in the meeting room. Her voice was Higher than Admiral Yuki, but just as serious. The Corvins are moving faster than we expected. They will reach Helios Prime in 6 hours, not 6 days. Taeho looked at the new intelligence reports spread across the table. The enemy fleet had suddenly increased their speed. They were burning more fuel and pushing their engines harder than before. We need to hit them now. Captain Binwoo continued. But Admiral Yuki is still preparing the main assault based on your gap observation. Can you find us another advantage? Something to help the light cruisers strike first. Taeho studied the papers while Captain Binwoo waited. He was not used to this kind of pressure. Back home he worked as a logistics coordinator for a shipping company. His job was to make sure trucks and ships delivered goods on time. It was boring work, but he was good at it as he looked at the Corvin fleet data. Something bothered him. The numbers did not make sense. Their fuel consumption was wrong for the size of their fleet. Either they had ships hiding somewhere or they were running low on resources. He had seen this problem before at his old job. When shipping companies started burning through fuel too fast, it usually meant they were desperate to meet a deadline. They would spend extra money to avoid being late. I think they might be in trouble, he told Captain Binwoo. What kind of trouble, she asked. Her tentacles stopped moving and her scales shifted to a deeper blue. Look at these numbers. Taeho pointed to his calculations written in simple Korean numbers. They are using 30% more fuel than they should. This is not normal behavior for Corvins. They are usually very careful with resources. Captain Binwoo called her technical officers to check the math. Her computers confirmed what Taeho had noticed. The Corvin fleet was indeed burning fuel at an unsustainable rate. Why would they do this? She wondered. Taeho thought about his shipping experience. Maybe they have a deadline. Maybe someone is forcing them to attack faster than they want to. Or maybe they are running out of supplies and need to finish this battle quickly. The idea spread through the fleet like fire. The Corvins might not be as strong as they appeared if they were desperate. It changed everything about how to fight them. More requests came for Taeho to review battle plans. The Archon Windriders wanted him to look at atmospheric combat patterns. Their ships were designed to fight in the air around planets, not in empty space. He studied their plans using the same simple logic he used for everything else. The Archons were trying to use complex flight patterns like they would in atmosphere, but space was different. There was no air resistance, no gravity wells to use. For cover, you are making this too complicated, he told Commander Jorik. In space, the fastest path between 2 points is a straight line. Your fancy flying patterns just waste time. And fuel. Commander Jorik looked offended at first. His golden feather tips fluffed up in anger. But then he realized the human was right. All their beautiful aerial maneuvers meant nothing in the vacuum of space. The Vex crystalline minds asked him to review their probability calculations. They had run millions of scenarios through their quantum computers, but wanted a human perspective. Taeho looked at their data and felt confused. The Vex were using every possible variable in their calculations. They accounted for solar wind, cosmic radiation, gravitational effects from nearby planets and hundreds of other factors. Your math is perfect, he told them. But you are thinking about everything except the most important thing. What is that? The Vex representative asked. Its crystal body hummed with curiosity. The people. You are trying to save, Taeho said. Every hour you spend calculating, the Corvins get closer to Helios Prime. Sometimes you have to act even when the numbers are not perfect. The Vex had never considered this. Their entire culture was based on perfect calculations and precise measurements. The idea of acting without complete data was foreign to them, but the human was right. While they calculated, the enemy moved closer to innocent civilians. Math was important, but it could not save lives by itself. Word spread through the fleet that the human observer could see things differently. He did not have advanced technology or special powers. He just looked at problems from angles that others missed. The other species began to whisper among themselves. Some called him a tactical genius. Others thought humans might have evolved special strategic abilities on their war-torn planet. A few believed he was using some kind of mental power that their scanners could not detect. Taeho tried to explain that. He was just using common sense and basic logic, but nobody believed him. How could something so simple produce such good results? The truth was that each species had become too specialized in their thinking. The Zentari focused on brute force tactics. The Archons thought about aerial superiority. The Vex calculated probabilities. The other species each had their own narrow expertise, but Tejo was not an expert in anything except basic problem solving. He looked at the whole situation instead of just one part. He asked simple questions that others forgot to ask as the fleet prepared for the accelerated attack schedule. More commanders sought his advice. They brought him problems that their sophisticated systems could not solve. And somehow, his simple approach kept finding solutions. A supply officer from the mantis species asked about logistics coordination. His insect-like appearance scared most beings, but Tejo treated him normally. The officer was struggling to coordinate fuel. Deliveries between different ship types. Tejo suggested grouping ships by fuel consumption rate instead of by species. It was obvious to him, but revolutionary to the mantis officer who had been trying to supply ships based on their home planets. Winged engineering commander from the stone folk needed help with repair schedules. Their rock-like bodies made them excellent engineers, but they thought in geological timescales. They wanted to do perfect repairs that would take days. Just fix what you need to fight, Tejo advised. You can do perfect repairs after the battle. Save the civilians first, then worry about making everything perfect. Each solution seemed simple to Tejo, but amazed the aliens. They had forgotten that sometimes the best answer was the most obvious one. Their advanced civilizations had made them think that every problem needed a complex solution. As the 6-hour deadline approached, the entire fleet was restructured based on human observations. Light cruisers would strike first using the gap Tejo found. Atmospheric fighters would fly straight instead of fancy patterns. Supply ships would prioritize speed over efficiency. The quiet observer from Earth had accidentally become the most influential strategist in galactic history, and he still did not understand why everyone thought his ideas were so special. Kim Tejo walked into the biggest room he had ever seen in his life. The ceiling stretched so high above his head that he could barely see where it ended. Massive screens covered every wall, showing star maps and battle formations that moved like living things. The air smelled strange, like metal and something he could not name. He carried a simple black notebook and a blue pen. These were the only things Earth had given him for this job. Everyone else in the room had glowing tablets and floating displays that responded to their thoughts. Tejo felt very small and very human. The Galactic Council war room buzzed with activity. Dozens of alien species filled the space. Each one looked more impressive than humans could ever be. The Zentari had 4 strong arms and scales that changed color when they got angry. The Archons looked like giant birds with wings that sparkled in the light. The Vex were made of living crystal that hummed with inner power. Tejo found a chair in the corner, where nobody would notice him. That was his job after all. He was just supposed to watch and learn. Earth was new to this galactic community. They wanted to understand how these meetings worked before they tried to join in. Admiral Yuki from the Zentari Federation stood at the center of the room. Her scales flashed bright red as she spoke. Her voice was deep and powerful, like thunder rolling across mountains. The Corvan Empire is moving again, she said. They have surrounded Helios Prime. The people, there have no weapons, no armies. They are just miners and farmers. The Corvans will kill them all if we do nothing. The room erupted in noise. Everyone started talking at once. The bird-like Archons flapped their wings and screeched in their musical language. The crystal Vex hummed louder and their bodies glowed brighter. The other species made sounds that Tejo had never heard before. He opened his notebook and started writing down what he saw. This was what Earth wanted to know. How did all these different species work together? How did they make decisions when they were so different from each other? Commander Jorik, from the Archon fleet, stepped forward. His feathers were pure white, except for golden tips that caught the light. We cannot risk our trade routes, he said in perfect galactic common. The Corvans might attack our cargo ships if we interfere. The Vex representative was a tall crystal being whose name sounded like music when spoken. We have calculated the probabilities. It said the chance of success is only 37%. The risk to our combined fleets is too high, Taeho kept writing. He noticed that everyone seemed to have a good reason not to fight. The Zentari wanted to save the people on Helios Prime, but they could not do it alone. The Archons worried about their business. The Vex looked at numbers and saw failure. Other species had their own concerns as the argument continued. Taeho found himself looking at the big screen that showed the Corvan fleet. The enemy ships were arranged in a pattern that looked strong and threatening, but something about it bothered him. He had done his military service back home like every Korean man. All young men had to learn basic tactics and strategy. He started sketching the enemy formation in his notebook. The Corvan ships formed a wall of metal and weapons that seemed impossible to break. But as he drew, he noticed something. The left side of their formation had fewer ships than the right. There was a gap not big enough to see easily, but it was there. Taeho remembered his military training about fleet formations. A gap like that usually meant one of two things. Either it was a trap designed to lure enemies in, or something had gone wrong with their planning. He looked more carefully at the intelligence reports that were displayed on the screens. The reports mentioned that a Corvan heavy cruiser had taken damage in their last battle. Maybe that was why the gap existed. If they were missing a big ship, their formation would have a weak spot. He did some quick math in his notebook, the kind of simple calculations he had learned in school. If a strike force could get through that gap, they might be able to reach the enemy command ship. The Corvans always put their admirals in the center of their formations, thinking it was the safest place. The meeting was getting louder and more heated. Admiral Yuki was arguing with 3 different species at once. Her scales were now dark red almost, black with anger. The Archon commander kept talking about trade profits. The Vex was recalculating probabilities every few seconds. Hours passed and nothing got decided. The species could not agree on anything. Some wanted to fight, some wanted to negotiate, some wanted to do nothing at all. Taeho kept taking notes and watching. He felt sorry for the people on Helios Prime, who were waiting to see if anyone would help them. Finally, the meeting ended with no decision. The different species would go back to their ships and think about it more tomorrow. Meanwhile, the Corvan fleet was getting closer to the mining colony. As the room emptied, Taeho gathered his courage and approached Admiral Yuki. She was still angry, her scales flickering between red and orange. He had never talked to an alien before and he was nervous. "Excuse me, Admiral," he said quietly. She looked down at him with 4 large eyes that reminded him of a lizard, but somehow seemed kind. "Yes, little human." She said, "What do you need?" "Notice something about their formation," he said, opening his notebook. "I think there might be a weakness." Admiral Yuki looked at his simple drawing. She had expected to see complex computer models and mathematical equations. Instead, she saw a hand-drawn sketch with basic notes written in Korean and English. The other species were leaving the room, but a few stopped to listen. A human observer was actually trying to give tactical advice. "This was something new. Show me what you see," Yuki said. Taeho pointed to his sketch here on the left side. "There are fewer ships. I think they lost a heavy cruiser in their last battle. If someone could get through this gap, they might reach the command ship." The Archon commander laughed. The sound was like bells ringing, but not in a nice way. "A human thinks he understands space warfare," he said. "Better than our quantum computers and battle AIs." But Admiral Yuki was studying the sketch more carefully. She had fought many battles and she knew that sometimes the simplest observations were the most important. Her own computers had been focused on the overall strength of the Corvan formation. They had not looked for small weaknesses. "I want to run simulations based on this," she said to her staff officers. The other species looked surprised. Some seemed amused that anyone would take advice from a human. Others seemed curious to see what would happen. Taeho felt his face getting hot with embarrassment. Maybe he had made a mistake. Maybe he should have stayed quiet in his corner. But Admiral Yuki was already calling her tactical officers. Within an hour, the simulation results came back. The Zentari computers had tested Taeho's observation. A small, fast strike force could indeed slip through that gap. The chances were not great, but they were much better than a direct assault. Word began to spread through the fleet. A human observer had spotted something that all their advanced technology had missed. The quiet watcher in the corner had found a way to save.
Helios Prime,